Chenmark's a company that actually owns several different companies.
What was like the trigger in your mind that like, okay, I want to do this acquisition roll-up model?
We learned over time that there are these great businesses out there that people have worked on for decades, and they don't have a succession plan.
So why buy businesses instead of just start them?
What was like your biggest lesson learned?
The reality is you don't know how to buy a business until you buy one. We've done over 40 acquisitions to date.
Walk me through the process of like what it takes to buy a business, like the searching, the hunt, looking for them.
Is there something that's going to be there if the owner walks away? If the business is super reliant on the owner, you can't really buy that business and have the owner leave.
It is a great day to be part of the Dirt Life. We are mixing up a little bit. Today we've got Palmer Higgins with Chenmark join us in the studio. Palmer, welcome.
Hi guys, how you doing?
Fantastic. And what's really cool is that, so Chenmark is not a lawn care company. I know we've been doing a lot of lawn and snow companies. Chenmark's a company that actually owns several different companies, including Mainly Grass, who we had on the podcast last week. And Palmer, we met him through one of our lawn care peer groups, and we really appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Hey, Liam, kick it off.
Yeah, man. Well, yeah, good to have you on the podcast, Palmer. We want to talk to you for a while here. So I guess kind of like just take us back. Like I know you're, the CEO of Mainly Grass a couple of years ago, and you're also the founder of Chenmark. But just like let us know, like how did Chenmark get going? I know you started with like your brother and your brother's wife there, but like just give us like the rundown. What was like your story? Where'd you go to school, and just a bit of your background?
Yeah, so went to school, small liberal arts college in the Northeast. I studied economics, which I think is when you go in liberal arts is like the proxy for business, but really doesn't really teach you anything about business whatsoever. First job out of college was typical finance thing on Wall Street in New York City. So I wasn't in investment banking. I was in investment management. So I was doing what was called buy-side equity research, basically like extreme fundamental analysis on 60 of the S&P 500 companies. It's a trial by fire to learn how to analyze businesses and deal with a ton of data, but pretty quickly realized that that's not what I want to do with my life. Really enjoyed the bosses I worked with. They were awesome, but I didn't want their job. I didn't want their boss's job. And so it's pretty clear to me that life wasn't going to be a long-term life for me. Fortunately, James, my brother, Trish, my sister-in-law, were also doing more traditional finance jobs in New York and also felt similarly. And we hatched this idea to start a company that was going to acquire long tenured small businesses with the expectation of owning them indefinitely. And that was 10 years ago. Flash forward now, and that's exactly what we've done. There's been a lot of lessons learned for sure. And we've iterated on some things, but the core concept of buying small businesses, typically from retiring owners, and owning them indefinitely and supporting their operations has been the through line throughout it all.
Wow, super cool. It's like, what was like the trigger like in your guys' mind where you're like, okay, you're working on Wall Street, you're working for like these bankers. What was like the trigger that was like, you know what, I'm done. We want to go and acquire these businesses?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's like a one trigger, but like dissatisfaction with what you're doing can be a trigger in and of itself. Youth is also a bit of a trigger. Ignorance is bliss. So we were at a different stage of our lives. We were young. There's definitely a little bit of naivete associated with it. I think looking back, we had a really high comfort level with betting on ourselves. We had a lot of comfort with delayed gratification. And we knew that if we were going to do this, we were going to build it in a way that it was going to be a pretty slow build in the beginning in order to be able to go faster later. And that just meshed with our personalities well. It was like sort of the anti-startup at the time, VC, startup, blitz scaling, like that has basically the last 10 years has been the more sexy thing to do. And we were kind of doing something totally different.
So why buy businesses instead of just start them?
Yeah, you need to have a good idea to start them. And we didn't have any good ideas. And you could argue that Chenmark in and of itself was a startup idea. Right? What we were choosing to do at the time was fairly to very unique. Not a lot of other people doing what we were doing. And once we started down that road, we were sort of, what we do is sort of quasi-tangential to a world called entrepreneurship through acquisition. But back then, what we were doing, which is now considered a holdco type strategy, was not really the norm. In fact, it wasn't something people did. And so we were told in no uncertain terms that what we were doing was wrong and it wasn't going to work. So you could argue that Chenmark was a startup itself. Our business model was to acquire businesses. And we did that simply because we didn't have a great idea of what business to start. And we learned over time that there are these great businesses out there that people have worked on for decades, and they don't have a succession plan. They don't have a transition plan. And they're great businesses, but they're just small. And because they're small, they don't attract a lot of attention from more institutional buyers like private equity or big strategics. There was opportunity there. And so we chased that.
Very cool. And just to give the audience context, how many companies does Chenmark own right now, and how many employees approximately?
Yeah, 11 companies now. We would call those platform companies that we operate in a very decentralized model. So those 11 companies are operated totally independently of one another. They have their own CEOs, their own management teams. They run their own P&Ls. They run their own payroll. Like they, in theory, could get carved out of the Chenmark ecosystem and operate just fine. We've done over 40 acquisitions to date, so M&A is a hallmark of our process. People, we have a fair amount of seasonality in our businesses. So I guess that's something we've gotten comfortable with. Lawn care being in the north being one of them for sure. So peak season, if when all of our businesses are at peak staffing levels, we're probably in the 600 to 700 employee range.
Very cool. Like, what kind of businesses are these? Like, I know a couple, but tell me about them.
Yeah, we're all over the place. So we have a few lawn and landscape companies. So we obviously mainly grass is our lawn care business. We also have some landscaping businesses that do more traditional maintenance and snow services. They're all in the snow belt. We have some boat tour businesses throughout the East Coast. So Maine down to, we have one in Florida as well. We have an agriculture business, fruit tree farm. We have a paint retailer. We have an equipment dealer, a collection of equipment dealer locations. We have a food manufacturing business. That one's in Western Canada by you guys. Yeah, so we're in a lot of different industries and a lot of different geographies.
Yeah, so it's like what I was reading the other day is like I saw that there's a stat out there that like I believe 71% of all business owners between like the $1 to $5 million in earnings are owned right now currently by baby boomers. So what's very interesting with your strategy is like you're essentially like capitalizing at the perfect time. Like, yeah, they're gonna be retiring, they're gonna be moving on. And so what your kind of whole thing with Chenmark is like they're gonna be retiring, they're a good sized business, but you can go in there and try to get them for a 2, 3, 4 times EBITDA compared to like the stock market at like 20, 30 times earnings, and then basically grow them infinitely over time. So it's a very interesting model. Yeah, so that's very cool. Can you just like tell us a bit more like why did you choose this? What was like the trigger in your mind that like, okay, I want to do this acquisition roll up model?
It's not really a roll-up model. That's something that's a little bit different. Roll-up would be picking one specific industry and trying to be pretty aggressive about buying up a bunch of businesses in that same industry. Certainly, a lot of our businesses have gone on to acquire other businesses themselves, but I'd say that's mostly that is all opportunistic and not programmatic.
Would that be True Green, for example?
True, yeah, they're acquisitive more so to just like defend their territories at this point because they're so big. I think the roll-ups, if you want to do like lawn care, like Sensky is doing that right now, Fairway is doing that right now, right? They're trying to get to True Green scale by aggressively buying up competitors. So the trigger, I mean, so you asked a couple different questions. Like what taught us this? I'd say having a background in traditional finance gives you an ability to like understand how deals work and how to basically model those. The reality is you don't know how to buy a business until you buy one. And we're certainly not advocating or we're not trying to pretend like we are deal mavens. I think the purpose of acquiring a business is to operate it well. It's not to just be an acquisitive buyer. And we're not doing anything super fancy in terms of these deals. We're not leveraging them to the hilt. We're not expecting them to grow a ton. We're not expecting them to have to buy other companies to make the deal math work. We're just trying to find good businesses that have been around for a long time that we think will continue to be around for a long time. And we want to be owners of those. And we want to hopefully support those operations over time. And if we can add value in that, great.
Interesting. So like what type of businesses like do you look for? Is it just like anything real estate, like lawn care, like anything? Or do you guys target like a specific like old school business, kind of like the boring blue collar businesses? Like what's kind of like your motto with choosing a business for like what you're going to choose and not choose?
Yeah, certainly boring blue collar businesses are great with us. Real estate, probably not. That's sort of, I classify that as a different asset class. We might acquire real estate in addition to or in conjunction with a business acquisition. But it's going to have to be tied to a business. And really the answer there is we'll look at anything that we think has durability of demand because we expect to own these businesses indefinitely. So we need to be confident that the core product or service that company delivers into the marketplace is going to be substantially in demand for decades to come. And that box can be checked in a lot of different ways. And we're happy to look at a lot of different companies. Case in point, we have tourism businesses and agricultural businesses and manufacturing businesses, all of which we think checks that box.
Can you walk me through the process of like what it takes to buy a business? Like the searching, the hunt, looking for them. I imagine there's a ton of due diligence that goes through it. Can you walk us through what it takes to actually buy a business? And out of the businesses that you actually reach out to or they reach out to you, how many of them actually end up being an acquisition percentage-wise?
Yeah, I mean, we could take multiple hours of podcast on just that topic. So I'll try. We only have like 20 minutes left here. So I'll try and blitz through it. Honestly, the first process is trying to find a business that wants to sell, is interested in selling, and is a good fit for us. That's before you even talk about price. So are they even interested in having a conversation about selling, and do they have a business that would be a good fit for us at Chenmark? And then it's a bunch of information sharing and analysis on the front end to make sure that what do these numbers look like? What does the business model look like? What is the strategy? How about the people that are in the business? is there something that's going to be there if the owner walks away, right? If the business is super reliant on the owner, then you can't really buy that business and have the owner leave, right? You're not, what are you buying at that point? And then so you have to agree on a price, and that can be very hit or miss. And once you do that, you think you're really close to the end, but you're kind of halfway, maybe. And then you got to do a bunch of diligence to make sure that what you think you actually know. And then you got to negotiate legal docs, which can be a pain and can be a frustration for sure. I think whenever legalese gets involved, it can really muddy the waters of a relationship between a buyer and a seller, but it's something sort of both parties have to go through. And then ideally you close, and then the real work starts, the real work of actually operating the business and making sure it goes well. That's where the magic happens.
Do you have the original sellers sometimes stay on as the CEO or an operator, or do you tend to put your own CEOs in there?
Yeah, so we put our own CEOs in there. We're buying businesses from owners who are selling because they want to step out. And that works fine, but we understand that those owners are playing a very active role in their business, and we need to be prepared to backfill their role. And we have developed over the years a CEO development program, of which Edward went through. That's why he's the CEO of Mainly Grass now, to be CEOs of all these businesses that we acquire.
What makes a better CEO in your opinion? Someone that's very analytical, numbers driven, or the people person?
Yeah, I think Edward actually has a great line here. It's not an or equation; it's an and equation, right? When we operate in a model that we do, a very decentralized model, we're putting a lot of agency and a lot of responsibility on these CEOs, and they need to be really capable people. And they need to be the right fits. And so I'm not really super interested in making huge trade-offs. People are different, and I think everyone is going to have to be authentic to themselves to lead a company in the best way they can, which means they might be more analytical than people, but you can't be completely deficient in one or the other. You got to have an element of both, and you got to be good enough in both. And if you're not, it's just not going to work.
Your CEO leadership program that you guys made, break that down. What does that work on for the individual?
It's a multi-step program. We bring people in to work with us here at Chenmark HQ in Portland, Maine. They work with us on sort of a couple different things, M&A, current acquisition pipeline. They help us evaluate opportunities and execute on new deals. And they work with our current operating companies on sort of strategic projects. Step two is they go and step into one of our current operating companies in a senior leadership capacity. So a senior leader, non-CEO, maybe that's a general manager, head of sales, CFO, branch manager, division manager, could be anything like that. Generally, they're working directly with the CEO, and they're going to be in a position of responsibility and leadership. And that'll give them a real hands-on look at what it's like operating in a small business. And they do well in that, then they become CEOs.
So where do you find these CEOs? Do you just put an ad on Indeed, CEO for Mainly Grass, and then you get applicants? Or what's your process? And I imagine the salary for CEOs got to be really high. So I'm sure there's a lot of people that just apply. How do you weed them all out? So yeah, what's your process for that? And then also second question, how do you pay your CEOs when they actually are hired into the company?
Yeah, so we're hiring all the time, and we now hire them into cohorts, basically classes twice a year. We bring people into this CEO development program for a few reasons. I think it helps them get to know their counterparts and their sort of colleagues better if they're all starting at the same time, at least within a cohort, and it allows us to create a better program for them. So twice a year, we have a new crop of people coming in who are coming in because they want to be a CEO of a small business, and we're recruiting all the time for that. We have a great team here that is sort of out in the world trying to find people who are interested and might be a good fit for that. And
so just to cut you off, is there a job guaranteed for them, or is it just kind of like a funnel to just get applicants? Are they promised a job when they come into the SVP program?
The GVP program, they are not promised a CEO job. I don't think that'll ever be the case, and we want to make sure that we made a good hire, and I think they want to make sure that they joined the company they thought they were joining, and so it's very much a position that has to be earned.
Okay, yeah, no, continue. So then after they go through that program, then what's the deal, and then how do you compensate all the CEOs?
Once they get through the program, as new opportunities arise, they throw their hat in the proverbial ring to lead a future business of ours. Compensation wise, I'll say generically, I think the salary is competitive, very competitive. But the real juice is we compensate all of our CEOs based on the free cash flow that the company they run generates. And if they want to keep that, and it gets paid out in cash. So if they want to keep that, great. But one thing we do is, if you believe in the story of Chenmark and you believe in the compounding ability of the holding company, you have an opportunity to take that incentive compensation and buy Chenmark stock with it. Chenmark is entirely self-funded and entirely employee owned. So the only people who have access to Chenmark stock are Chenmark employees.
So they can take those free cash flow bonuses. They can either cash out or they have the opportunity to buy stock within Chenmark with it.
Yeah, correct.
Just for the sake of the audience, can you just define what exactly is free cash flow?
Well, the finance definition would be cash flow from operations less maintenance capex. But I think you can quantify it however you like. What we're trying to get at is what's the cash left over after you've satisfied all of your obligations. So what's the cash that if you were operating like a more traditional owner operator, what's the cash you'd be able to put in your pocket at the end of the day? Because ultimately that's what matters, that your operating business is producing cash in excess of what it needs to fund itself, not just for today, but for tomorrow.
And why not just like look at like metrics like net income or EBITDA and compensate? Why is free cash flow king over those other metrics?
We've had this conversation before, boys. Yeah, because that doesn't capture all of the costs. If net income is a P&L item, that doesn't capture capex or working capital. So you can't pay your bills with revenue if it's stuck in AR. That's an easy example, and that's great. If you're putting all this cash in your pocket, but you're not replacing your trucks that are getting super old, or you're not replacing your spreaders. Well, great. You're like, in a little bit, your business is going to go backwards. So you got to make sure you're doing those things. And unfortunately, the P&L isn't the be all end all. So you need to encapsulate all three financial statements.
Between your, I know I've asked you this before, but just for the sake of the audience, between the three statements of finance, right? The balance sheet, cash flow statement, and P&L, what's your favorite one?
Yeah, cash flow statement is the one that gets the least love. It gets beaten into you when you're a Wall Street analyst. Cash is king, and the cash flow statement it lays everything bare.
What's funny is I'd say that statement out of the three is probably the least talked about.
Yeah, everyone's basically running on QuickBooks, right? So, and if you spit out financials in QuickBooks, it gives you a P&L balance sheet. You have to actually calculate your cash flow statement, or you have to actually select QuickBooks to calculate it for you. So I think that's why it's an afterthought. But it's important.
Absolutely. So one big question that I have is like, how on earth do you get started? Like, how do you finance? How do you go buy $1 million or a $4 million business? Like, where do you get the financing from? Is it SBA loan? Is it you guys finance it yourself? Like, how does that work? And then over what term? Like, how would, if somebody wanted just to get going right now, how would they start?
Yeah, I mean, now honestly, it's a lot easier because the world of entrepreneurship through acquisition is a lot more well known than it was even 10 years ago. Certainly more than that. So you could probably just Google that. You get a lot of resources. There's some books out there, but the SBA, I know you guys are in Canada, so not really applicable to you guys, but the SBA program is a wonderful program for people who are looking to acquire small businesses that sort of are underneath a certain size threshold and allow you to get a lot more access to debt than you would otherwise get. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. I don't think there is no one right way to finance a deal between debt and equity. And I think it's personal to you, personal to your financial position, personal to your risk profile, and I think somewhat dependent on the business profile that you're acquiring. But I think if you have the desire and you really want to do it, the opportunity is 100% there. And I think the opportunity is open to almost anyone.
There's many different ways to fund buying a business. Would you say like there's equally as many different options to like to negotiate how the money is going to actually get into the hands of the seller or the buyer? Seller.
Sure. I mean, you really have a couple different options there. I mean, if the vantage point is dollars into the seller's pocket, there's really three options. Cash at closing, you can fund that with debt or equity. You can have the seller finance some of it, so that's seller financing. So they're basically serving as the debtor. Or you can do essentially like contingent payments, which are going to come in the form. Typically, that's all bucketed in the world in the term of an earnout. So I'll pay you X if Y happens. Fundamentally, those are the only three ways you're going to get dollars into the hands of sellers. And I think that's all how you approach the deal, what the business looks like, how interested you are in it, what they're willing to agree to. And that's where sort of the art and the science of deal making comes in.
When we were talking to Edward, he mentioned that, and you mentioned briefly at the start of the podcast that Chenmark's goal is to buy the businesses indefinitely, aka never sell them. If that's the case, what is the end goal, and what is the why do you do what you do?
Yeah, because I think it's a lot more impactful and purposeful than working finance on Wall Street. Finance on Wall Street, I was a small cog in a very big wheel. I didn't really feel connected to the work that I was doing. And being in this world, I definitely am. Whether it was running mainly grass, now I'm working with a number of our CEOs. We run real businesses. We provide real jobs to people. We help people grow professionally in their careers. And I think we provide great products and services to our customers, and we're impactful in our communities. And I think all of that is a much more full and impactful and purposeful life than what I had living in New York.
100%. And then at Chenmark right now, how many people like do you employ at the holding company? Like, do you guys have internal CFOs and marketing officers, or what does that look like?
We have a relatively small shared services team across technology, HR, and marketing, and are really sort of like consultants for our businesses. They're not taking on any day-to-day responsibilities for our businesses, so we wouldn't be centralizing CFO work or chief marketing officer work. For example, Edward was my CFO at Mainly Grass before he took over the CEO role. So we do operate very decentralized in HQ. We probably have 10 to 15 people here, and that includes me, James, and Trish. So it's a pretty thin overhead at the sort of HQ level by design, because we're not out there delivering service to our customers, right? That's our operating companies are doing that. What we do here is in service to what they do out in the real world.
So with this whole acquisition entrepreneurship, what was like your biggest lesson learned? Like, we all talk about, you learn by failures, right? Was there any like massive like setback or any massive like lesson learned? Like, we've definitely had lots at Yard Dogs, but tell us about one of those that had happened at Chenmark.
Yeah, the lesson learned is people matter more than you even realize. I think it's easy to say, and it's easy to sort of know sort of ethereally. It's like, oh yeah, academically I know people matter, but then you get into a business context and you realize people really matter, and specifically for us, the CEOs really matter. One thing that I love about small business is that one person or a small group of people can have a really outsized impact on a company. The catch is there's no guarantee that impact is positive. So if you have a poor fit in that CEO role, they can do a lot of damage to a business, to a brand, to a community, to an employee base pretty fast, because those decisions can be impactful and have a really quick feedback loop to them. So it matters a lot for us to make sure that those CEOs are the right people. They have the aptitude and the attitude to do the job well. And that's why we created our CEO development program, because we didn't want to, can you curse on this podcast? Is that allowed? All right. Like, we can't fuck it up. And so, yeah, we want to make sure that we're bringing them in. We're working with them well ahead of them becoming a CEO and making sure they're the right person for the job.
I've been you may have noticed I subscribe to the Weekly Thoughts. I really like your guys' blog that you guys are doing right now. What's the who writes it out of you three? Do you guys take turns? And what is the point of doing the Weekly Thoughts?
Yeah, so Trish writes 99% of it now. In the beginning, we used to trade on and off, but I'm the most painfully slow writer. So I quickly became the least contributing author, and then James fell off, and then for the longest time it's been Trish. So hats off to her for sure. And in the beginning, it was a couple of things. One, it was a bit of a forcing function to force us to sort of think critically about our business at a different level. When you're sort of in the weeds looking for our first business to acquire, it's easy to get very myopically focused. I think this was a good forcing function for us to think about business in general, and sort of update people along the way. And then the other big advantage was we wanted to give people a window into who we are and how we think. And I think writing is a great way to do that. Much more so than a bio on a web page. It says, here's where I went to school and here's where I went to work. That's not really going to tell you who we are or how we think, but writing a blog every single week for 10 years is going to give you the best window into who we are. Like, you can't really hide. And it really is us writing it. And, so I don't write it anymore. Trish does, but James and I edit it. So, we're still very much in the flow, although it's 99% Trish. And yeah, I think it's been a really good way specifically for business owners to get to know us without having spent obscene amounts of hours together, right? It's like, it sort of kickstarts that relationship to get to know them better.
So right now, with when you guys are looking for the deals, are they reaching out to you guys at Chenmark? Because I'm sure you guys are at the size right now where there's a lot of brand recognition, or are you guys cold calling businesses and dropping off newsletters? How do you guys find the deals? Is it through a broker? Just walk me through that process.
Yeah, all the above. So you hit on all three buckets. So we definitely are involved with brokers. I'll say deal intermediaries. So bankers, brokers, whatever you want to call them. And they have a lot of deal flow, and so we look at that. We also do outreach ourselves to businesses that we think are interesting from at least our vantage point, and would like to get to know them more to make sure that fit is good. And then the third bucket, which is certainly the hardest to build, and it's great when it happens. It doesn't happen a ton, and hopefully it happens more and more over time. People reach out to us. They say, "Hey, I know of Chenmark. and I think I might be a good fit, and I really want to talk to you because I like who you are and what you guys stand for. So that does happen. It's in either generally it's in only in geographies or industries that we're already involved in, but that's growing.
Very cool. Kind of like a side question for you. Have you heard of Alex Hormozy at all?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. So what are your thoughts on like what he's doing? So he does a kind of like more of a private equity where he'll buy like 30 or 40%, but the owner will stay on at 70%. Is there any takeaways that you've learned from him? Because I'm sure you guys are at a pretty similar scale. I just want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway, which is probably my biggest piece of feedback for people that call me and know what Chenmark does and they want to get into the world of entrepreneurship through acquisition, broadly speaking, my number one piece of advice is don't let anyone tell you that there's a right way or a wrong way. There's a million different ways to get into the world of if you want to call it private equity, if you want to call it small business equity, if you want to call it business equity in general. There's a million different ways to do it. 10 years ago, people told us what we were doing was dumb and it wasn't going to work. And we proved them wrong. And I'm very hesitant to tell people that this is the right way. That's the wrong way. This is the way to do it. And, I'd encourage everyone to sort of tackle it the way they see fit, and encourage everyone, if they have a conviction, go do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But like, what are your thoughts like on him in general though? Like, is there any like just in general, any like takeaways from him? Because he's obviously like really blowing up lately. I'm just curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not on social media, so like I see him somewhat on LinkedIn. I'm sure he's much more prolific on like Twitter and other stuff. So like I know seems like he's incredibly successful. It seems like he's found a niche. I know he got to start in gyms. I don't know what he's branched out to. But like power to him. Like he's found something that works and he's done it and he's made it work. So I think that's great. And I think there's plenty of other people that maybe aren't as well known that are also doing stuff equally well. And so I'd applaud them too.
As we kind of get to our end of our time here, Palmer, if you're not on social media, what would you say is your go-to source for learning things that you learn on a continuous basis?
Yeah, well, having a group of 11 CEOs, I think we all do a pretty good job of keeping each other in the loop on stuff that we should be aware of. I try and read a bunch and listen to podcasts a bunch. I don't drive as much as I used to when I ran mainly grass, and I was probably commuting 12-ish hours a week in the car. There's a lot of time for audiobooks and podcasts. I am on LinkedIn, so that's the one social media that I'm on, so you can probably find me there. And I do doom scroll LinkedIn for some content every now and again. But outside of that, that's generally in those avenues, stuff finds me, and I subscribe to a lot of newsletters.
Awesome. And speaking of newsletters, make sure that you subscribe to the Weekly Thoughts, chenmark.com. Check it out. It's very well written. It's fantastic to read. Trish does an awesome job. You do a pretty good job editing too, Palmer, for sure. And what would you say one is, just last question, if there is one book that you go back to again and again from a business book you've read, which is the book?
So every year I read Good to Great, Jim Collins. I think 1 million and probably 100 million billion people have read that. So that's not that unique of a hot take. I do think it's a really good book, and it's one of the few books that I reread. I'll give you another one that's probably a little bit less well known that I really like, and I recommend a lot to people that join Chenmark. It's Legacy by James Kerr, and it's basically a book about how to sustain a culture of excellence. It profiles the New Zealand All Blacks, but the book is really about how do you keep a culture of legacy that spans generations. And it's really about sort of like a culture of excellence. I think it's a really good book, and I highly recommend it.
Awesome. Well, Palmer, thank you so much for jumping on the Dirt Life, man. I learned a lot from this conversation, and I know all of our audience did as well. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, boys. Good to talk to you as always.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much, Palmer.